Alrighty guys, in this video what we're going to talk about is painting masks and using masks inside of Photoshop. So the first thing you want to know is masks are really cool. They allow you to non-destructively remove parts of your image so that you can use either one section or multiple different sections of different images all together as one, which we will see in our project one when we get there in a few days. So the first thing we want to do is what are masks and how do we paint them? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint with a nice bluish color in here my entire canvas. So I'm going to use my paint bucket tool like so, and then I'm going to duplicate my background because I don't want to get rid of my entire background. I want to non-destructively remove certain parts. So I'm going to hide the background layer, and inside this background copy, I'm actually going to click the little mask button that was not available in our very first video and add a layer mask. So when I click that, what it does is it adds a separate image on top of our image that will hide different things inside of our Photoshop project. So on this layer, if I paint in black on this background copy, since my background is selected, I'm going to change my brush to be a bit smaller. I can paint a little flower here. And it will erase part of my image, but if I decide that I no longer want certain parts of this mask, I can paint them back and change it on a whim. It is a non-destructive way of removing part of your image without erasing, while still maintaining your original composition. So if you have an image of a bee on a flower and all you want is that bee, you can erase and use your mask to hide the rest of that image, so all you have is your bee, instead of just destructively erasing, and if you mess up you have to Control Z to get it back. With this way you can just paint the error away. So a good way to think about it is white will bring back your original image, and black will hide original parts of your image, or change so that you can change them. So if I want the inside of this right here to suddenly be 100% see-through, I can do that. But if I change my mind, I can always come back and paint them away. So let's try that out on different types of images and using different tools in order to get this result. So what I have here is this seagull that we looked at in class, and there are a couple of tools that we can look at that are pretty easy to use to erase the background and this stock image logo right here, because all I want is my seagull and his rock. So the first thing we can do is we can use the crop tool here, or C on the keyboard, to erase our stock footage part. And all that does is when we hit enter after pulling that up, it will just remove that part of your image. That is a destructive form of editing, because if we bring this back up now, that is gone. But since it is something small, that is something we can do. But if we want to completely erase the background with our masks, what we can do is we can use this quick selection tool right here and paint in the background, and you'll see it automatically selects parts of our image to be erased or removed with a mask. Now, it's not the most intuitive of objects. As you see, my tail here's out, all of the white parts of my bird are out, parts of my rock have been selected, and that isn't exactly what we want. However, there is a select subject mode. It will ask if you already have the dancing ants on here if you'd like to delete or discard your current selection. For this instance, we do, so I'll hit OK. And what it wants you to do now is it will automatically generate the selection of your subject here on your composition. So as you can see, it automatically selected my seagull here, and if I wanted to add in this rock, all I have to do now is paint the rock and his foot, and it'll automatically add in that part of my bird. Now, it's not still perfect, as we notice when I zoom in over here, still parts of my tail feathers over here, and parts of between his mouth are still selected or non-selected respectively, and that's okay because with a mask we could manually go in and select that. But also inside of this tool here is the magic wand tool, which works similar. So I'm going to Control D to deselect, and what the magic wand does is say, hey, based on the pixel area that you've selected, I'm going to use a tolerance, which you can find up here at the top, of 15. So within 15 shades or 15 pixels of color of whatever you've clicked, that is what is going to be selected in a certain area. So if I click up here at the top, you'll see all of these colors are very similar to each other, and it automatically selects them all. And you can add multiple different selection areas just by holding down Shift. So I can click here and you'll see it adds a little bit more. Down here adds a little bit more until I have all of this blue selected. Like so. And you can see it automatically cuts out my rock. I'm not having near as many issues with my bird here. And then if I come over here and add a layer mask to that, you'll see it automatically cuts my bird out, which is the opposite of what I want. Now normally, if we were to go back a few steps, we could do Control-Shift-I and then click that button, but because this mask is very intuitive, all you have to do is make sure your mask itself is selected and hit Control-I to invert your mask. Now it isn't the best. You can see that I still have a little bit of fuzziness around here, but it worked quite well. Now a couple of other tools we have in here to mask certain objects are actually the mask tools themselves. So if we come back to this main car color that we looked at in class, if we wanted to, for instance, take this car and put it in a different background, or if we wanted to change its color, we could do so by painting on a mask. So I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit here, and I'm going to reset my colors right here. You can also manually click on here and take your forecolor back to black and your background back to white. But I'm also going to just click this little button right here. But it's very important before you click any mask button that I duplicate my background and hide my original image. Now the reason we do that is because if I mess up and I make too many mistakes, or if I accidentally start painting or deleting on this layer instead of using my mask, I have a backup and can go back to the original image. So now that I have my copy here still turned on, I have my background turned off, I can come over here to the Paint Mask button, and with my brush selected, I can paint inside of here, and you'll see it starts painting in red, kind of a see-through red, even though my color here is black. And if you also notice, my background copy is highlighted red. What this red means is you are painting a mask on this layer, because it's red, with this red color, so that you can see what is going on inside of your layer that you are actually painting. That way you don't get confused with your brush color or anything else. So what I'm going to do is, using that Shift tool that I was telling you about in your lassos video, is we are going to click on one spot on the top of the car, and I'm going to Shift click and just slowly Shift click all the way around this car. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So you see I missed a small spot there on the highlight. And we just want to slowly go around and highlight the entirety of this car. Now, if you make mistakes, don't worry about it. This tool is very forgiving. So now we have a slight outline of our car. Now we can manually go in and paint all of this insides, but that does sometimes take time. And if you have a very large mask area, that will take quite a while. But we can also go into our paint bucket tool right here. If you don't see it, just press and hold. It might be hidden under your gradient tool. And I'm just going to click inside here. But if you notice, it's very subtle. There is a slight outline of where all of our spots that we painted are. To fix that, all you have to do is click a couple more times inside of your canvas here, inside of your selection, so that your selection will grow a little bit more with the paint bucket tool. Now, once we're done, I'm going to go back to my brush tool. And all we have to do now to get our selection here is to turn off our quick mask mode. So I'm going to re-enable standard mode, and you'll see we get a slight line all the way around here. And just to check, I'm going to try to brush. Everything is on the outside. Remember, that's still okay because since we're going to be creating a mask, we can just invert the mask instead of Control, Shifting, and I to invert our selection. However, you can still do that and skip the next step. So with this background copy, I'm going to create our mask. And again, I'm going to Control I. If you already Control Shifted I before you made your mask, that works perfectly fine. But I'm going to just fix this right here by creating our mask and then Control I to invert the actual mask itself. Now, if I wanted to cut the car out, I would have left it, Control I, but I want to move my car because I want to put it on a really nice, flat, maybe bright green background. Now, I did miss some spots out here and around through here. Since we're using masks, it's a non-destructive way of editing. I can paint in parts that I've missed and paint in parts that paint away parts that I still want to be removed. So if I notice that maybe I don't want this back tire in here, I can just remove that. I can remove the undercarriage a little bit more, fix the tires as needed, just by painting. Now I'm working quite quickly. With masks, you do sometimes want to take your time because you don't want to accidentally remove too much because that makes more work for you. So just keep in mind that it is a slightly longer process. However, the results will look quite nice. And now we've got our car. I'm going to create another layer. And I'm going to select a nice green. And making sure we're on that new layer, not on our background copy or our mask, I'm just going to paint with a big brush by using my brackets the background behind this car to be lime green. Now that's how to paint a mask by using that method, but what if we're painting something a bit more complicated? So let's take back a look at the hair that we did in class. So we have this woman here. If we wanted to take her from this dining kind of setting, this kind of low light, maybe she's about to get brunch with somebody, take her out of this setting and maybe put her on a deserted island or some other location other than where she actually is. There's a couple of ways that we can do that. So I'm going to reset our button here so we can manually go in, take our mask here, paint her a little bit, and then slowly manually paint in her hair. But that's really tedious because you'd have to make sure you get all the wisps in order to make it look correct and natural. But there are some other tools that we can use inside of here to make it look natural when we remove her from her background. So what we want to do is create a mask of this lady as close as we can to the outside of her skin and hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my painting tool again. I'm just going to come in here and just as close as I can, I'm going to get parts of her hair like so. Try to get as much of her body as I can. Make sure everything on the inside is selected. I'm going to turn that off. And then I'm going to invert my selection because currently if I were to paint, I'd be painting the wrong part of her body. So I'm going to Control Shift and I because I want her, not her outsides. And then what I want to do with that dancing ant still selected is instead of using our brush tool or our masking tool here, what we want to do is actually just click the Marquee button. And what that does is it allows us access to the Select and Mask Refine section. So if we click on that, you'll see we have our lady here. She is all refined outside. You can see everywhere that is not inside of that selection we had is kind of grayed out. Now what this does is this allows us to have a clean slate behind her and slowly paint in the parts of her we want to keep while removing the background. So over here in this properties section, under view, there's a couple of different ways we can do this. I am personally fond of the onion skin, but you can also do the dancing ants, the overlay, on black, on white, straight black and white, or on layer. Like I said, I'm personally fond of the onion skin. You do want to make sure that your transparency is relatively high, somewhere between the 60 and 80 range. And then other than that, all of your other selections here don't really matter as much for this image. Now, depending on what image you're working on, you might have to shift the edge, smooth out the edges, feather some things, which will make things a little bit fuzzier along the edges, as you can see. You might have to add a bit of contrast, which makes the edges harder, or you might have to shift the edge in or out. But what we want to do is we want to use this refine brush tool over here, as well as the quick selection tool and brush tools inside of here to mask her out. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the quick selection tool. And then you can't zoom in without using the zoom tool. So I'm going to use my quick selection, and I'm just going to slowly brush in where her shirt, her arm, and neck are. And then what we want to do is just lightly go over the edge of where her hair is. And what this will do is it'll get the main bulk of the work done for you. You only want to do this to a certain point. As you can see, it starts bringing in the background there, so I'm going to have to undo one. And then you start to notice we have the wispies in here, and you can still see a few outside of our selection that we need to bring into our selection. So I'm going to click this refine brush here, and what the refine brush does is it looks at the color that you're refining and removes the background. So it'll strengthen the wisps and curls that we have here on our lady while removing that darker background behind her. So you can see we get more of those wisps in while removing our background so that she'll have a more clean shift to her new background. Now, if we were to do this manually, this would take quite a long time. But since we're doing this with the refining brush, it doesn't take too long at all. And now we have her fully masked out. She's got all those nice little wispy hairs. And once you're done painting, all you have to do is hit OK. And now you'll see she's got the dancing ants all around her. And all we have to do now is make sure we duplicate our background before we create our mask, hide our actual original background, and then just click our mask button. And there she is. She has been masked out. Now we can make a new layer, put it between our original background and our new one, and paint in a new background. And there we have it. She has been masked out with all of her wisps. She looks a little bit more natural than if we had manually gone in and hand painted all of those wisps out. It also took about a third of the time as if we'd tried to do that manually. And that's all I have for masks. I'll see you guys in the next video.